Hey, step back from the vehicle.
Sure. What's going on?
Is that your BMW?
Yes, it's registered to me.
How'd you get a vehicle like this? You don't look like an owner. What are you doing here?
I'm here for a scheduled meeting in that building, and I'm incoming chief of police. This is your last mission.
Racial profiling collided with basic verification when a patrol officer walked up on a black man in a tailored suit beside a black BMW SUV, treated the scene like a theft in progress, and kept pressing even after the man offered documents that should have settled it. The officer's body cam captured the posture, the tone, the escalation. People nearby noticed too, because nothing pulls attention like a uniform turning a quiet parking lot into a public accusation. Where are you watching from? Country or state? Drop it in the comments. If you watch stories where calm, documentation, and oversight expose bad conduct like the video and subscribe, because this one flipped fast. Here's how it started. The parking lot sat beside an upscale office complex, the kind with glass walls, security cameras, and polished entrances where belonging gets judged in a half-second glance. Cars came and went all morning. Most drivers blended into the environment, so nobody asked questions. Adrian Whitfield didn't blend. He pulled in early, parked the BMW, and stepped out wearing a fitted suit. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't hiding. He stood near the driver's side door, checked his phone, and looked like someone waiting for a meeting inside the building. Officer Kyle Brannon rolled through on patrol and locked onto the image like it explained everything. He didn't start by running the plate from a distance. He didn't check with building security. He moved straight toward Whitfield, with his body cam already recording, shoulders tight, face set, ready to figure it out in the worst way. Brannon skipped the normal human opening and went straight into suspicion. He challenged whether the SUV belonged to Whitfield. He pressed for an explanation before he asked for anything that would actually verify ownership. Whitfield responded like a professional who understood procedure and didn't want a scene. He stayed calm. He told Brannon the SUV was registered to him. He offered his ID and the registration immediately. That should have ended the contact in under a minute. Brannon didn't let it. He treated cooperation like a trick. The officer didn't move toward confirmation. He kept moving the goalposts. He ordered Whitfield to step away from the vehicle, increasing distance like he expected trouble. Then he demanded the key fob, not as a reasonable request to verify entry, but as a control move, something that kept Whitfield in a prove-it position. Whitfield complied anyway, hands visible, movement slow, documents ready. No argument because he understood what a lot of people learn the hard way. The moment you match an officer's emotion, you stop being seen as a person and start being treated like a problem. Brannon still acted like none of it added up. He pushed questions that didn't connect to the plate, the VIN, or the registration. He focused on why Whitfield was there, why he was dressed like that, why he was next to that vehicle at that location. The questions had a pattern. They weren't designed to confirm facts. They were designed to imply Whitfield didn't belong. Meanwhile, the environment changed. A couple office workers slowed near the entrance instead of walking straight inside. A person sitting in a nearby car turned their phone toward the interaction and started recording. A security guard watched from a distance, not intervening, just clocking the dynamics. Brannon radioed dispatch to run the registration, but he didn't wait like someone expecting the system to clear it up. He kept the pressure on. His tone stayed sharp. His posture stayed confrontational. He acted like the paperwork was just another obstacle to his suspicion, not the answer. Whitfield kept it tight and factual. He didn't over-explain. He didn't plead. He repeated what mattered. The BMW was his. The documentation matched, and he was there for a scheduled meeting inside the building. Brannon's suspicion shifted in a way that told on him. At first, he treated it like a stolen vehicle situation. Then, when Whitfield stayed composed and the documents lined up, Brannon's focus moved off theft and onto something uglier, whether a man like Whitfield could realistically own a vehicle like that in the first place. That's where the stop stopped being routine. Because once an officer looks at a person, and decides the problem is their existence in that space. Verification turns into theater. The goal isn't truth anymore, it's saving face. And Brandon was clearly headed toward a statement he couldn't take back once it left his mouth. Brandon should have slowed down once he had Whitfield's documents in his hand. He went the other way. He held the license and registration, glanced at them, then kept Whitfield in the same prove yourself box, like nothing had been produced at all. Control stayed the point. Distance stayed the point. The key fob stayed the point. Whitfield stayed where Brandon told him to stand. Hands visible. Voice even. He didn't negotiate the scene. He tried to end it with facts. Brandon acted like facts were optional. He kept asking for explanations that didn't connect to the vehicle record check, who Whitfield was meeting, why he arrived early, why he was dressed like that, why he was standing by the driver's side door instead of walking inside. None of it changed whether the BMW was stolen or not. It only changed how much Brandon could make Whitfield feel out of place. That's the chess move right there. Not show me proof. More like, talk long enough until you slip. Whitfield didn't slip. Dispatch came back with the basic confirmation Brandon claimed to be waiting for. The plate returned to a registered owner matching the documents. Insurance active. Address consistent. Nothing popped that justified the temperature Brandon brought to the interaction. A reasonable officer would have pivoted to closure. Quick apology. Clear the scene. Move on. Brandon didn't close it. Pride kept it alive. His suspicion shifted in real time. Theft didn't hold up, so he leaned into something harder to disprove. The idea that ownership itself didn't make sense. He started implying Whitfield didn't look like someone who could afford that kind of vehicle. Then he said it more directly, with a comment about how cars like that usually didn't belong to people like Whitfield. He didn't say it as a joke. He said it like it was an obvious truth, and Whitfield was supposed to accept it. Another jab followed, aimed at status, like Whitfield didn't look like the type who owned a Porsche either. Same message, same direction. Wealth plus blackness couldn't compute in Brandon's head, so he tried to make the math Whitfield's problem. That's when the parking lot's mood changed. People nearby stopped pretending they weren't watching. One office worker slowed down and stayed put. Someone recording from a car held their phone steady. A security guard didn't step in, but he didn't look away either. When an officer starts talking like that in public, everyone understands what they're hearing. Whitfield didn't explode. He didn't perform outrage for the crowd. He didn't give Brandon a reason to pretend the issue was attitude. He tightened up instead. Whitfield kept his answers short. Ownership was documented. Registration matched. He was there for a scheduled command transfer meeting inside the building. Nothing about that required debate in a parking lot. Brandon pushed again anyway. He repeated instructions. He kept Whitfield away from the vehicle. He held onto the key fob demand like it was leverage. The whole thing turned into a contest over who got to define reality, even with dispatch already confirming what Whitfield said from the start. That's the part people don't always understand about stops like this. Once an officer ties their ego to suspicion, verification stops being the goal. Saving face becomes the goal. Backup arrived before Brandon could fully spin it into something worse. Officer Lena Park pulled up and read the scene fast. A calm man in a suit, documents already out, Brandon running hot, bystanders watching, cameras likely rolling. Park didn't add drama. She asked for the basics and got the basics. Then she noticed what Brandon seemed determined to ignore. Whitfield wasn't acting like someone trying to get away with something. He was acting like someone waiting for the system to catch up to the truth. Whitfield made a decision right there, and it wasn't about winning an argument. He reached for a different kind of proof. Whitfield stopped trying to convince Brandon, because that game never ends. He shifted to verification that didn't depend on Brandon's mood. Whitfield identified himself as Commissioner Adrian Whitfield and stated he was the incoming chief of police, there for a scheduled command transfer meeting inside the building. Then he produced municipal credentials that matched that claim. No theatrics, just official ID that carried weight. Brannon didn't accept it cleanly. He hesitated. He kept that same skeptical posture, like the idea was impossible on its face. Officer Lena Park treated it differently. Park understood what was happening in real time. The stop had already drifted out of a normal lane, and it was happening in public, with cameras nearby. Credentials like that weren't something you debate in a parking lot. You verify them through dispatch and supervisors, fast, proper, documented. Park took the lead on the radio and requested confirmation through dispatch. She didn't frame it like a challenge. She framed it like procedure. Dispatch didn't take long. The response came back clear. Adrian Whitfield was the newly appointed chief of police, arriving that morning for a scheduled command transfer meeting at that office complex. The details lined up with what Whitfield had been saying from the beginning. That confirmation changed the air instantly. Brannon's posture shifted because now the suspicion didn't just look wrong. It looked reckless. The officer had moved from a vehicle theft check into personal commentary about who should own luxury cars. And he'd done it while his own camera was running. Whitfield didn't rub it in. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture back. He just held position. Then the building's front doors opened and command staff stepped out. The timing made it unavoidable. They weren't walking out randomly. They were walking out because they were expecting Whitfield, and the meeting was real. They approached him, greeted him formally, and saluted him in front of the lot. No confusion, no hesitation. That rank reversal became visible to everyone watching. It landed hard. Bystanders weren't guessing anymore. The security guard wasn't neutral anymore. The people recording didn't stop recording. Now they had context. The officer on the scene had been profiling the department's incoming chief in broad daylight. Brannon tried to reset the interaction. He tried to soften his tone and slide into a routine check explanation. It didn't fit what the camera already captured. It didn't fit what witnesses heard. It didn't fit the earlier escalation. Whitfield responded with the same calm he'd kept the entire time, but he made the line clear. He framed the issue as verification versus profiling. He made it clear that registration confirmation should have ended the stop, and the rest was conduct, tone, assumptions, and the decision to keep pushing after facts were confirmed. That's when the scene stopped being about the BMW. Now it was about the officer. Sergeant Mateo Ramirez arrived as the situation turned into a visible leadership problem. Ramirez didn't argue in the lot. He didn't hold a roadside debate. He watched, listened, and took control like a supervisor who understood liability and standards. Ramirez flagged the Bodycam footage for review on the spot. He treated the incident as a conduct issue that needed formal documentation, not informal excuses. Whitfield didn't announce punishments in public. He didn't give a speech. He let the moment speak for itself. Before he walked inside with command staff, he delivered one point that didn't need volume to hit. When verification confirms what someone told you, continuing the stop turns into something else, and everybody can see it on camera. The parking lot cleared out, but the problem didn't. Inside the building, Whitfield kept the schedule. The command transfer meeting still happened. That mattered because it showed discipline. He didn't let Brannon's conduct hijack the day. He also didn't pretend it was no big deal. Sergeant Mateo Ramirez handled the next step, the way supervisors are supposed to when something goes sideways on camera. He documented the incident as a conduct review, not a vague miscommunication. He secured the Bodycam file, tagged the key moments, and noted the presence of witnesses. Park's radio traffic and dispatch confirmations went into the timeline too. That created a clean record. What Brannon saw, what he chose to do, what facts were available, and how he behaved after those facts came back. Brannon tried to frame it as a standard suspicious vehicle contact. That explanation couldn't carry the weight of what he actually did. The escalation didn't match the evidence. The language about who usually owns certain cars pushed it out of the good faith mistake lane and into bias and professionalism. Within the first week, Whitfield didn't make it a public spectacle, but he didn't protect it either. He ordered an internal investigation and treated it like a first-day test of standards. Not just for Brannon, for the whole department. If the new chief watched this slide, everyone would learn the real rules. Say the right words in policy, then do whatever you want in the field. So Whitfield did the opposite. Brannon got placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Ramirez and professional standards pulled the full footage, dispatch logs, and statements from Park and witnesses. Building security provided camera angles from the lot. The bystander video that circulated online helped too, not because it replaced the body cam, but because it showed how the encounter looked from the outside. A calm man being treated like he didn't belong, in a place where belonging gets policed quietly until a badge makes it loud. Park's role stood out in the review. She didn't pile on. She didn't co-sign the attitude. She verified the credentials properly and used dispatch the way it's meant to be used. The department recognized that difference because it showed the problem wasn't policing is hard. The problem was choices. The community reaction came fast. People weren't shocked that profiling happened. They were shocked it happened to the incoming chief on his first day in broad daylight with cameras running. Local groups raised it at city meetings. Office workers who witnessed it talked about it at work. A simple question kept popping up. If this is how an officer talks when he doesn't know who he's dealing with, how does he talk when no one important is watching? Whitfield didn't answer that with a speech. He answered it with process. The investigation ended with discipline that matched the conduct. The department treated Brannon's comments and escalation as violations of professionalism and bias standards. The exact outcome depended on policy and prior history, but the direction was clear. Brannon couldn't keep working the street the same way after that footage. The city also faced exposure on the civil side, because when an officer turns a consensual contact into an extended detention without real grounds and adds profiling language on top, attorneys don't need to spin anything. The camera already did the work. Whitfield made department-wide changes immediately after. He reinforced a simple operational rule. Suspicious vehicle contacts required articulable facts, not vibes. He required supervisors to review a sample of body cam footage weekly from patrol, not just when a complaint hit the desk. He tightened guidance on requests like key fobs and step-away orders, making officers justify those moves with a safety or investigative reason that made sense on paper and on video. Then he addressed the culture piece, without pretending a memo fixes culture. He told his command staff to stop treating bias complaints like PR problems and start treating them like performance problems. Officers who couldn't handle professional neutral verification didn't need better excuses. They needed retraining, removal from certain assignments, or separation. The standard wasn't whether the officer felt suspicious. The standard was whether the suspicion was real. A month later, the parking lot incident still floated around the department, but not as gossip. It became an example Whitfield's trainers referenced in roll call. How quickly an officer can create liability, how easily ego turns a basic check into misconduct, and how cameras don't care about intentions after the facts are in. Whitfield didn't pretend he was immune either. He used the moment to underline something uncomfortable. Status didn't protect him from profiling. Credentials just changed how fast the truth got acknowledged. That was the lesson he wanted the public to see. If someone like him could get pressed like that with documentation in hand, anyone could. The difference was what happened next. Oversight, records, accountability. So here's the question for you. If you were Whitfield in that lot, calm and compliant, and the officer still kept pushing after dispatch, confirm the registration, what would you do next? Drop your take in the comments and share this with someone who thinks just comply always ends it. And if you want more real grounded stories where receipts and recording bring consequences, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.
Hey, let me see some ID.
What's this about?
Stand up, we're gonna talk outside.
I can talk right here. What did I do?
We got a call, you match what they described.
What description? What crime?
Shut up and stop arguing and do what I'm telling you.
I'm not arguing. I'm asking why you're demanding ID.
Racial profiling hit a wall the moment a patrol officer walked into a packed downtown cafe, zeroed in on a black man sitting alone, and demanded ID without stating a lawful reason. The man stayed seated. He kept his hands visible. He didn't raise his voice. He kept asking the procedural questions that force an officer to pick a lane. Was he being detained? What was the specific reason? And was he free to leave? The officer escalated anyway, trying to turn a vague check into control. Quick pause. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments. And if you watch stories where, calm, documentation, and clear boundaries beat pressure tactics, like and subscribe. Now rewind. It was a weekday morning downtown. The cafe had the usual rush, people in line, laptops open, drinks getting called out, staff moving fast. Security cameras sat in plain sight, one at the register, one covering the seating, another near the entrance. The kind of setup that makes it hard for anyone to later claim something happened that didn't. Malik Johnson was there, like he often was, early, quiet, alone at a small table near the wall. Laptop open, coffee in front of him, phone face down. He wasn't bothering anyone. He wasn't filming. He wasn't pacing or acting erratic. Just existing in a public place. Officer Grant Mercer came in wearing full uniform. He didn't enter like someone grabbing a drink. He scanned the room like he was shopping for a target. He noticed Malik and walked straight over. Mercer stopped at Malik's table and started the contact with that vague, controlling tone officers use when they want a person to start explaining themselves. He asked for ID right away. No introduction that mattered. No clear reason, just a demand. Malik didn't argue about feelings. He didn't tell a story. He asked the first question that matters. Was he being detained? Mercer didn't answer cleanly. He repeated the ID demand and acted like Malik was being difficult for even asking. He framed it as a simple request, like the reason wasn't important. Malik asked again, slower. He stayed seated. Both hands stayed on the table, visible. Mercer's posture tightened. His voice sharpened. The language shifted from, I'm asking to, I'm telling. He ordered Malik to stand. He insisted Malik identify himself. He implied consequences if Malik didn't comply. Malik didn't move fast. He didn't stand. He asked for the lawful basis. He asked if he was free to leave. Mercer still wouldn't name a reason that held up. He reached for the usual vague lines someone called. He matched something. It was suspicious. Nothing specific. Nothing that explained why this man at this table right now needed to produce papers. People around them started paying attention. A couple customers stopped typing. Someone in line turned fully toward the table. A woman in a booth angled her phone in a way that looked like scrolling, but the lens pointed toward the scene. Staff noticed too. The barista kept working but kept looking over, tense. Elena Park, the manager, caught it fast. An officer looming over a seated customer. A demand for ID. No clear explanation. The imbalance was obvious, and it was happening inside her business, on camera. Elena walked over and addressed Mercer in a controlled, professional way. She asked what the issue was, and what lawful reasons supported the demand. She kept her voice level and made sure everyone nearby could hear the question. Mercer didn't like being challenged in public. He kept focusing on Malik, like Elena wasn't supposed to be part of it. He pushed the idea that Malik had to comply because he said so. Elena didn't let it stay private. She pointed out the security cameras and stated that the footage would be preserved. Then she told Mercer she was calling for a supervisor to come to the cafe. That changed the temperature. Mercer's confidence didn't vanish, but his approach shifted. He started talking like he needed to justify what he'd already done. He tried to keep Malik in the box of non-compliant, without ever answering the basic questions Malik kept asking. Malik stayed consistent, same posture, same controlled movements, same questions. He wasn't performing for the room. He was building a clear record. And now the officer wasn't just dealing with Malik. He was dealing with witnesses, cameras, and a manager who understood exactly what needed to be saved. Mercer didn't like the manager calling for a supervisor, so he tried to regain control the way some officers do, by speeding things up. He shifted closer to Malik's table, lowered his voice, and acted like this could still stay between them if Malik just gave him what he wanted. It didn't work. Malik kept his hands where the whole room could see them. He kept asking the same core questions, detained or not, reason or not, free to leave or not. Mercer kept dodging the clean answer and kept treating Malik's calm as defiance. Elena didn't play along. She stayed near enough to be part of the scene, far enough to avoid any claim that she interfered. She told her staff to keep working and to not touch the security system settings. Then she did the smart thing. She wrote down the time on a notepad near the register and added a quick description of what she saw. Officer entered, approached one customer, demanded ID, escalated without stating a clear reason. Mercer keyed his radio. Everyone heard that tone shift too. He asked for a supervisor to respond, but he framed it like he was dealing with a non-compliant subject, not a customer sitting in a cafe. While they waited, Mercer tried new angles. He turned his attention to Elena and pushed for the cafe's video. Not a request through channels, not a formal process. He wanted it handed over right then, like the business owed him evidence on demand. Elena shut that down without theatrics. She made it clear she would preserve footage. She wouldn't hand it over informally. She also made sure witnesses heard her say it. That mattered. At the same time, a customer in the booth kept recording. Nia didn't point her phone like a spotlight. She kept it low. She captured the audio in the space. Mercer standing, Malik seated, Elena present, customers watching. Malik stayed focused. No insults, no sarcasm. He didn't try to win the crowd. He treated the situation like it would be replayed later by someone who didn't care about Mercer's tone. Only facts. Minutes passed. Enough time for the room to lock into attention. Enough time for Mercer to realize he couldn't force a quick submission without doing something that would look bad on camera. Sergeant Ramirez walked in with that supervisor pace. Not rushed, not casual either. He saw the crowd first, then the table. He read the room in one glance. Officer looming, customer seated, manager nearby, multiple phones out. Ramirez didn't start by scolding anyone. He started by getting Mercer away from Malik's face. Small repositioning. A few steps. Space created. Mercer went first, of course. He tried to set the narrative before anyone else could. He told Ramirez he had a reason to identify Malik. He leaned on vague suspicion language. He suggested a complaint. He hinted at a description match. Ramirez asked for specifics, not the category. The details. What description? Who called? What behavior? When? Mercer didn't have clean answers. He had impressions. He had vibes. He had the kind of story that sounds fine until it has to match timestamps. Ramirez then spoke to Malik, still keeping distance and keeping it calm. Malik described the sequence in plain order. Officer approached, demanded ID, refused to state a lawful basis. Escalated when Malik asked if he was detained. Malik made it clear he hadn't threatened anyone, hadn't blocked anyone, hadn't refused to leave a private property. He had simply asked procedural questions and stayed seated. Elena added what she observed from the business side. She stated Malik was a customer, the cafe hadn't called police, and the cameras covered the entire incident. She also stated she would preserve the footage and provide it through proper channels if requested. Now, Mercer had a problem. Ramirez couldn't justify a detention off a foggy explanation in a room full of witnesses, not with cameras overhead. not with bystanders recording, not with a manager ready to document and preserve. Mercer tried to push one last claim, that Malik's refusal to provide ID created the suspicion. Ramirez didn't bite. That logic collapses fast when the original demand never had a lawful basis. Ramirez ended the contact. He instructed Mercer to step back and disengage. He didn't make it a big speech. He didn't need to. The decision itself said enough. Mercer backed off, but he didn't look relieved. He looked irritated. He walked out like someone already rehearsing the report he planned to write. Malik didn't celebrate. He stayed steady and did the next smart thing. He asked for the supervisor's identifying information and the incident reference. He also made sure Elena knew he wanted the footage preserved, not edited, not clipped, not overwritten. Elena moved immediately. She noted the exact time the supervisor arrived and the time Mercer left. She pulled the camera system menu and marked the block of footage for export. She also asked 2 customers, including the woman in the booth, for their contact info in case the department tried to claim there were no witnesses. By the time the cafe settled back into normal noise, the record was already forming. Body camera, security footage, witness, video. A clean timeline written down while it was fresh. Mercer still had his badge. He still had his authority. He also had a shrinking space to invent. By lunchtime, the cafe moment had already turned into paperwork. Malik didn't wait a week to cool off. He wrote down a timeline while it was still clean in his head. Arrival time, where he sat, when Mercer entered, when the supervisor showed up, when the officer left. He kept it factual because that's what survives later. Elena moved fast for a simpler reason. Most camera systems overwrite. Days pass, footage disappears, and then everyone argues about memory. She didn't let that happen. She pulled up the camera playback, grabbed the full-time window around the incident, and exported the video from the angles that covered the entrance and Malik's table. She kept the original system recording intact and saved a copy outside the system so it couldn't get lost by accident. The witness video mattered too. Nia sent Malik the original file, not a compressed social media clip. She kept her own copy. Same with another customer who had recorded a few minutes from a different angle. That afternoon, Malik filed a complaint with the department and requested the body-worn camera footage tied to Mercer and the supervisor. He also requested the dispatch record for the supposed call that Mercer had implied justified the contact. If there was no call, that would show up. If there was a call, the details would have to match what the officer claimed. A few days later, Mercer's written report landed in the system. It tried to make the whole thing sound tidy. A suspicious person check, a lawful demand for identification, a refusal framed as non-compliance. The report leaned on broad language that sounds fine until you compare it to time-stamped video. Then the footage got reviewed side by side. Security video showed Mercer walking in, scanning the room, and heading straight for Malik without talking to staff first. It also showed Malik staying seated while Mercer stood over him. The witness recording captured the tone shifts and the repeated demands that the report smoothed over. Body camera later filled in the gaps. Mercer had pushed the ID demand before he had articulated any specific reason, and the supervisor had pressed him for details he couldn't clearly give. The mismatch was obvious. One more problem showed up soon after. The report changed. Not a spelling correction, not formatting. The justification language shifted, and the sequence got cleaned up. Details that had been vague became more specific after the video existed. Edits don't always mean misconduct, but edits that move a report closer to what cameras show raise a different question. Was the report written from memory, or was it written to survive review? That's when the issue stopped being only about a bad contact. Now it was about reporting integrity. Internal Affairs opened a case. The department tried the standard containment approach at first. Treat it like a complaint. Interview a few people. Close it quietly. That strategy didn't work here because the facts didn't rely on opinions. 3 angles told the same story. The paper didn't. The dispatch side didn't help Mercer either. The call justification didn't line up cleanly with what he'd implied at the cafe. Staff statements undercut it too, because the cafe hadn't called for Malik and nobody had reported him as a threat. Once an officer's credibility starts wobbling on video, other parts of the system notice. Prosecutors, defense attorneys, supervisors who don't want their unit dragged into it. People start asking a practical question. If this report doesn't match the footage, what about the last 10 reports? A public defender recognized Mercer's name and asked for discovery in a separate case. Then another attorney did the same. It wasn't about Malik anymore. It was about whether Mercer had a pattern of vague suspicion language and aggressive identification demands that weren't supported by clear, lawful reasons. The unit got uncomfortable fast. Malik kept the pressure in the most boring way possible: documentation, follow-ups, and copies. He didn't argue on social media. He didn't rely on going viral to force action. He stayed inside the process while keeping his own record of every submission, every response, and every delay. And the more the department tried to treat it like a minor customer complaint, the more the contradiction between video and reporting kept pulling it upward. Because once the story becomes the report got adjusted to fit the footage, you don't just have a profiling problem. You have a trust problem that touches cases, courtrooms, and oversight outside the department. The department tried to close it like a normal complaint. Quick interviews, a polite email, maybe a reminder about professional conduct. That approach works when it's one person's word against an officer's. This wasn't that. Malik's complaint package had a clean timeline. Elena had security footage from fixed cameras. Nia had a witness recording with clear audio. The department had body camera. 3 separate sources lined up on the same sequence. Mercer walked in, targeted Malik, demanded ID, escalated without stating a clear lawful basis, and only shifted once a supervisor and cameras became the center of the scene. Internal Affairs could have still tried to bury it, but the report edits made that dangerous. Because once Mercer's report history showed meaningful changes after the fact, the story stopped being officer made a bad call. It became, did an officer manipulate a narrative? And that triggers a different level of concern inside a department. It also triggers attention outside it. Malik didn't threaten anyone. He didn't grandstand. He did something more effective. He requested records through formal channels and kept copies of everything he submitted and everything he received, including timestamps and version history. The first outside pressure point hit the department through the courts. Defense attorneys started asking for Mercer's Bodycam and report histories in unrelated cases, not because they cared about the cafe, because credibility is evidence. If an officer's reports don't match video in one incident, it becomes fair game to question his reports in other incidents. Prosecutors hate surprises like that. Judges hate it even more. That forced the department's legal unit to look at the situation with a risk lens instead of a PR lens. Then it got worse for Mercer's side. A pattern review began inside the unit. It started small, pulling a sample of Mercer's stops and matching them against available footage, CAD logs, and reports. That's when the same habits showed up repeatedly. Broad suspicion language, thin or generic reasons for detentions. Reports written in a way that made the officer's actions look more justified than what audio and video suggested. At that point, Internal Affairs wasn't the end of the line. It was the start. The case got referred upward. City oversight. Then state-level civil rights reviewers. Then it reached federal review through the same pathway these cases usually travel when integrity and documentation are in question. Civil rights enforcement interest, evidence handling questions, and whether there's a pattern inside a unit. That didn't mean helicopters and raids. It meant emails, subpoenas, and structured interviews. It meant data pulls. It meant policy and training documents requested. It meant the department's leadership getting asked questions they couldn't answer with slogans. Mercer's personal accountability came in layers. First, the department restricted him. Less discretion, less contact-heavy assignments. Then formal discipline landed once the investigative file hardened. The footage contradicted the report, and the edits made it look like the report had been shaped to survive review. Then the big consequence hit that Mercer didn't control. His credibility became toxic. Once prosecutors decide they can't safely rely on an officer's testimony, the officer's job changes. Court testimony becomes a liability. Cases get dismissed or renegotiated. Old convictions get challenged. The department starts doing damage control, not for one incident, but for every file his name touched. That led to wider case rechecks, stops, searches, arrests. Any situation where Mercer's narrative was the foundation. Some cases held up, and some didn't. Enough didn't that the department had to admit the review publicly. The department's statement tried to keep it general. They framed it as commitment to transparency and continuous improvement. Standard language. The public didn't focus on the statement. They focused on the video. Because the video showed the simple truth. Malik sat in a cafe and got treated like a problem that needed explaining. The officer couldn't articulate a lawful basis until the moment got supervised and recorded. Malik's outcome wasn't just, they apologized. He got a formal finding that the contact was improper. He got written confirmation tied to the complaint process. The city settled his civil claim to avoid the risk of a trial centered on conflicting reports and verified footage. The amount wasn't the headline part of this story. The accountability was. Elena's Cafe changed procedures too. Not because they did anything wrong, but because they saw what works. They posted a visible policy. Staff do not provide customer information without legal process. They trained employees on who to call and how to document incidents without escalating them. They upgraded camera retention so footage didn't vanish in days. They kept a logbook for major incidents with timestamps and witnesses. Malik didn't walk out thinking the world was fixed. He walked out knowing something specific. Calm plus documentation can beat pressure tactics. That's the real lesson here. Not courage as a performance. Not yelling, not chasing a viral moment. Control your body language. Keep your hands visible. Ask the questions that force clarity. Make the official story collide with recorded reality. Preserve the evidence early, get witnesses, get times. Make it impossible for someone to clean up the narrative later. If you were sitting in that cafe watching this happen, what would you have done? Would you have recorded? Would you have stepped in like Elena? Or would you have looked away and hoped it ended fast? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who thinks recording doesn't matter. And subscribe if you want more stories where the facts don't bend just because someone has a badge.
Come off the porch, right now.
Why? What's the reason?
I said step down. Don't stand there arguing with me.
I'm not arguing. I'm
You
asking
don't
what I
get to
did.
question me. Step off the porch. Hands behind your back now. Stop resisting.
I'm not resisting.
Keep your hands where we can see them.
This officer thought he was about to pull a suspicious guy into a quick detention and move on with his shift, but he didn't realize he was walking into a situation that would end up on thousands of screens by sunrise. The man on the porch, Andre Whitfield, wasn't running from anything. He wasn't in a car. He was smoking on his own front porch in Dayton around 3 a.m., and the only thing he kept doing wrong was refusing to leave his property without being told what he'd actually done. Once the officers put hands on him, it stopped being a simple check and turned into a public lesson about how fast authority can overstep when nobody thinks there's a camera watching. Before we get into it, tell me where you're watching from, city and state, or your country if you're outside the U.S. And if you keep up with stories where footage and facts expose abuse of power, hit like and subscribe, because this is exactly how accountability starts. Someone records what officials later try to rewrite. Now back to how it started. Dayton was quiet at that hour. Andre was outside because he couldn't sleep and wanted to smoke. Nothing dramatic. Porch light on, street empty. The kind of moment most people forget 5 minutes later. A patrol car came through the neighborhood with headlights sweeping across yards and driveways. Earlier, the officers said they'd noticed a car that looked like it was trying to avoid them. That claim was the entire foundation for what happened next. No reported crime tied to Andre, no call from a neighbor, no description that matched him. They followed the car anyway, watched it turn through side streets, and then traced it to Andre's address. Here's where the logic broke. Even if the car did end up near his home, Andre wasn't inside it. He wasn't walking up a driveway with keys. He was standing on his porch, smoking, and watching police cars pull up like they already decided he was connected. The officers came up and told him to come off the porch. Andre didn't yell back. He didn't threaten anybody. He asked why they were ordering him around and what he'd done. He also pointed out the obvious. He was on his own property. Instead of giving him a clear reason, they kept pushing the same demand. Andre stayed put because, from his point of view, stepping off the porch meant agreeing that they had a lawful reason to control him. He wasn't trying to win a debate. He was trying to avoid getting dragged into a situation where the rules suddenly change, and he becomes the problem just for asking questions. The longer Andre refused to move, the more the officers' tone shifted. Their patience wasn't running out because he was dangerous. It was running out because he wasn't making it easy. They wanted him in the open, away from his front door, and they wanted it fast. Andre kept it consistent. He asked what he was being stopped for and why they were treating him like a suspect. The officers didn't offer anything specific that matched their level of aggression. No clear accusation. No explanation tying him to the car beyond "it came here," as if an address automatically turns into guilt. Then one officer stepped closer and reached for him. Andre pulled back, not like he was trying to fight, but like anyone would when a stranger reaches for them on their own porch. That moment became the excuse. The officers grabbed him, forced his arms, and turned a verbal confrontation into a physical arrest. While they did it, Andre kept repeating the same point. He was on his property and he hadn't been told what crime he committed. The officers kept moving him anyway, controlling his body, because they couldn't control the conversation. What they didn't account for was the porch camera. A Ring doorbell had the whole exchange. It didn't capture a suspect refusing lawful orders, the way police statements sometimes frame these incidents. It captured a man standing in place, smoking, asking for a reason, and getting grabbed because he didn't comply with a demand that never came with a clear legal basis. Later, body camera footage filled in the details from the officer's side, and it didn't rescue the story the way departments hope it will. Different angle, same core issue. The escalation happened before any solid explanation did. Andre ended up in cuffs, still asking what he'd done. The officers acted like they'd handled a normal stop and kept it moving. Andre didn't have the luxury of forgetting it because he knew something important. Once the footage got out, this wouldn't stay a private argument on a porch. It would become a public question for the department. Why were officers treating a man on his own property like a suspect with no crime to point to? That's where the real fight started. Andre didn't get hauled off his porch with some clear explanation waiting on the other end. The reasoning stayed messy even after the cuffs clicked. Officers kept leaning on the same vague idea. A car looked like it was avoiding them. It ended up near his address, and therefore Andre needed to do whatever they said the moment they said it. That logic sounds tough in a report. It doesn't hold up in real life, because Andre still wasn't the driver of that car. He still wasn't caught doing anything illegal, and the officers still couldn't point to a specific crime that justified grabbing a man off his own porch for refusing to step into their control zone. By the time Andre got to the station, the tone shifted the way it always does after an arrest that's more force than facts. The officers weren't hyped anymore. Now they had to explain it. And explanations get real careful when there's video. Andre's side stayed consistent. He told them he'd been on his porch smoking, and they tried to order him off it without saying what he'd done. He kept asking what he was being detained for. He kept getting pressure instead of an answer. Then the quiet cleanup phase started. This is where a lot of cases die in silence. A person gets arrested, spends hours stressed out, gets released, and the department counts on exhaustion to do the rest. People have jobs, people have families. People don't want to spend months fighting over something that already happened. Andre didn't just let it fade. Part of that was pride. Most of it was reality. He knew how it looked. A black man in handcuffs at 3 a.m. is easy for strangers to judge if they don't see the beginning. He needed the beginning, the whole beginning, so the ring footage mattered immediately. That camera didn't take sides. It just captured what happened on the porch. The demands, the refusal, the grab, the escalation. Andre and the people close to him pushed to get everything. Ring footage, body cam reports, names, times. And then came the predictable move from the other side. Early messaging. At first, the story got framed like the officers had reasonable suspicion. Like Andre caused his own arrest by not cooperating. Like stepping off his porch was a normal request, and not a major shift in control. That framing works when the public only hears one voice. It collapses when video shows the timeline. Because on video, reasonable suspicion has to actually exist. You can't just say it and hope nobody asks what it was. Once the ring clip started circulating, the reaction wasn't complicated. People watched a man stand on his porch and ask what he did, and they watched officers decide the question itself was the problem. That's what hit people. Not just the arrest, the attitude behind it. The local conversation turned into a bigger one fast. Folks weren't debating whether Andre was polite enough. They were asking why police thought they could pull someone off private property on a hunch that didn't even connect to him. Then the body camera footage came into the picture. Bodycam didn't rescue the officers the way it sometimes does when a clip is missing context. It added context that made it worse. It showed the same thing from the inside. Officers talking themselves into escalation, repeating orders without building a legal reason, treating the porch like it was a crime scene just because they wanted it to be. Once both videos were out there, the case stopped being a neighborhood incident and turned into a public test for the department. People wanted to know what the policies were, what officers were allowed to do on private property, and why he didn't comply, was being treated like a crime when Andre was asking a basic question any innocent person would ask. And behind the scenes, the department had a new problem. The footage didn't match the clean version of the story. Internal reviews don't start because departments suddenly get a conscience. They start because the receipts are too clear to ignore. If the public can see the gaps, officials have to either admit it or double down and look dishonest. Andre's situation got re-examined. The key fact landed hard. He hadn't done anything wrong. No illegal driving, no matching suspect description, no evidence tying him to that car beyond it came to this area. No crime on the porch. Just a refusal to step off property when officers couldn't explain why they were there. Once that conclusion took shape, everything the officers did after the initial approach looked worse. The grab, the force, the arrest. It all became an answer to a question nobody liked hearing. What did I do? Public backlash kept building. Community voices got louder. Media coverage followed because the story had everything that makes people angry. A man at home, a vague pretext, and a camera showing the gap between lawful policing and because I can. At that point, discipline stopped being optional. The department had to respond in a way that looked real, not symbolic. And that's where the pressure started turning into consequences. Once the video spread, the department lost control of the story. That's what changed everything. Internal memos and careful wording don't compete with clear footage, especially when the footage shows a simple pattern. Officers treated suspicion like proof and treated a man's porch like their workspace. Public pressure didn't come from one place, it came from everywhere at once. Neighbors shared it, local pages reposted it. People who didn't even know Andre started asking the same question he asked on the porch. What was the crime? And when the department couldn't answer that with something specific, the focus shifted to the next question. Why did the officers escalate so fast? Early on, officials tried to stand behind the usual language. They leaned on officer safety, ongoing investigation, and non-compliance. That framing works when the public doesn't see the beginning. In this case, the beginning was the whole story. The Ring video showed Andre in place, smoking and asking for a reason. The Bodycam showed the officers from their own perspective, still struggling to justify why they needed him off the porch in the first place. Together, those videos boxed the department in. If they defended the arrest, they'd be defending the idea that an officer can grab you on your property simply because you don't step where they want. That's a losing argument in a city full of homeowners and renters who understand one thing perfectly: a porch is still part of home. So the review process turned from checking a complaint into damage control with deadlines. Supervisors had to read the reports. They had to compare them to video. They had to explain the gap between what was claimed and what was visible. And then the core finding hit, quietly at first, and then publicly. Andre Whitfield had done nothing wrong. That one sentence changed the entire case from messy but justified to unlawful and avoidable. If there's no underlying offense, the chain snaps. The stop looks shaky. The orders look pointless. The force looks excessive. The arrest looks like retaliation for not being obedient enough. That's what the footage made impossible to deny. Discipline started as the department's attempt to calm the outrage. The problem was, the outrage wasn't about tone. It was about conduct. People weren't asking for an apology. They were asking whether the officers would face real consequences for grabbing a man off his own porch over a hunch that didn't even point to him. The department moved through the steps fast. Administrative review, policy checks, internal interviews, supervisors trying to figure out who approved what and why. Nobody slowed it down. Once the scrutiny locked in, the officers involved couldn't hide behind split-second decisions, because nothing about that porch encounter was split-second. They had time. They chose escalation anyway. Eventually, the outcome landed where the footage had been pointing the whole time. The officers involved got fired. That mattered because it sent a message the public almost never gets to see in these cases. The video didn't just create a debate, it created consequences. The job losses didn't undo the arrest, but they did confirm something important. Andre wasn't confused about his rights, and he wasn't lucky to be proven innocent later. He was right in the moment. Andre's name became attached to a bigger warning. People used the case to talk about property lines and policing, but also something more basic: how quickly some officers treat everyday behavior as suspicious when the person doesn't look like someone they're used to respecting. A man smoking on his porch became connected to a car the police chose to follow. That's not an investigation. That's assumption with a badge. The longer-term impact didn't stay stuck on those two officers either. Departments don't like getting embarrassed on video. Policies get re-emphasized. Training gets scheduled. Supervisors start reminding people what they're allowed to order and what they're not. The phrase private property suddenly shows up in briefings like it's a new concept. Even when institutions move for selfish reasons, the result can still protect the public. Andre didn't walk away from it like some movie hero. Real life doesn't work like that. He walked away knowing he'd been targeted for nothing, handled roughly on his own porch, and then forced to fight for the truth after the fact. He also walked away knowing the footage mattered, and not just for him. It set a boundary in public view. Here's the moral, and it is not complicated. When authorities can't explain what you did, they'll try to make the problem your attitude. They'll try to turn questions into disrespect. They'll try to turn standing still into obstruction. That's why recording matters. That's why oversight matters. Not because cameras make people perfect, but because cameras make people accountable. Now, I want to ask you, if you were Andre, standing on your own porch with police telling you to step off without giving a reason, what would you do? Would you comply immediately just to avoid the risk? Or would you hold your ground and demand the legal basis? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you've been in something like this, traffic stop, porch encounter, we just need to talk that turns into force. Share what happened. Someone reading might need that perspective. And if you want more story times like this, where the footage exposes the truth and the power games don't survive daylight, make sure you like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more.
Turn the music down right now. I'm not asking
There's
again.
no music playing in this house.
Don't do that. We got a complaint. I can cite you right now.
Then you're at the wrong address.
You don't get to tell me how to do my job.
Verify it before you threaten me.
I can come in and make sure the disturbance stops.
No, you cannot.
Officer Tyler McKenna walked up to a quiet house believing he was about to handle a simple late-night noise complaint. He treated it like a guaranteed win. Show up, pressure the homeowner, leave with compliance. He didn't know he was at the wrong address, and he definitely didn't know the man inside, Andre Whitaker, ran internal affairs for the same county. That combination mattered because McKenna didn't just arrive mistaken. He arrived aggressive. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments. City, state, or country. And if you like stories where someone stays calm, documents everything, and forces accountability the right way, hit like and subscribe. These situations only change when people refuse to let them get brushed off. Now, rewind. It was a late night in May 2023 in a suburban county neighborhood with two streets that sounded almost identical, Oak Ridge Lane and Oak Ridge Drive. Dispatch received a noise complaint tied to 847 Oak Ridge Drive. The call got routed wrong, and McKenna was sent to 847 Oak Ridge Lane instead. One wrong word, one wrong house. Andre Whitaker was at home. No party, no music, no TV blasting. Nothing that matched the complaint. He was doing what most people do at that hour, trying to finish the day and get some sleep. McKenna pulled up already convinced he had a problem house. He didn't take time to verify the street name against the complaint details. He didn't slow down to confirm he was actually where the caller reported the noise. He walked straight to the door with the mindset that the person inside was about to get corrected. Whitaker answered calmly. He didn't act confused, because the situation wasn't confusing. It was obvious the officer had the wrong place. McKenna immediately brought up loud music and spoke as if it had already been confirmed. Whitaker responded the simplest way possible. Nothing was playing and the house was quiet. McKenna didn't accept that answer. He treated it like an excuse. Whitaker corrected him again and explained the address issue. He told McKenna he was on Oak Ridge Lane and the complaint address was Oak Ridge Drive. He asked him to double-check. That's where the interaction could have ended with a quick radio confirmation and an apology. McKenna chose the opposite. Instead of verifying, he escalated. He talked about writing a citation. He talked about arrest. He hinted he could come inside and make sure the noise stopped. None of that made sense because there was no noise to stop, and there was no legal basis for threatening entry when the officer hadn't confirmed the complaint location or even verified the situation. Whitaker stayed composed and focused on facts. He didn't argue about respect. He didn't throw his title around. He kept pointing back to what mattered: the wrong address, the lack of music, and the need to verify before making threats. McKenna's approach showed a bigger issue. He was acting like his authority replaced evidence. When Whitaker didn't get intimidated, McKenna pushed harder, like the goal wasn't solving a complaint, but forcing submission. Another detail made the moment worse. McKenna's body camera wasn't activated. Whitaker noticed. He'd spent his career reviewing incidents where body cameras accidentally weren't on during the exact moments accountability mattered. He didn't say it dramatically. He registered it the way an investigator does, as a problem that would matter later. The pressure continued for several minutes. McKenna kept insisting the complaint was valid. Whitaker kept insisting the facts didn't match. The conversation stayed controlled on Whitaker's side, but the threat was still real because officers don't need to be right to make your night dangerous. They only need to decide they're going to. The change came when McKenna finally realized who he was dealing with. It wasn't some magic flip. It was recognition. Something connected: the name, the tone, the confidence, the way Whitaker kept returning to policy and verification. Once McKenna understood Whitaker wasn't just any homeowner, the aggression dropped. The threats stopped. The posture softened. He ended the encounter and left without a citation, without an arrest, and without doing the one thing he should have done from the beginning: verify he was even at the correct address. Whitaker didn't let the situation fade into nothing happened. He treated it like a serious incident because it was one. He documented it right away while details were fresh: the address mix-up, the threats, the refusal to verify, and the body camera failure. He also made a decision before the night even fully passed. He was going to file a formal complaint. By morning, Whitaker wasn't debating whether it was worth it. He'd seen too many incidents die in the space between anger and action. He moved like someone who understood timelines, documentation, and how quickly a bad encounter gets rewritten once people start protecting themselves. He started with a clean account of what happened: time of contact, wrong street name, the claim of loud music that didn't exist, the threats to cite, arrest, and enter, the fact that the body camera wasn't activated. He kept it factual because he knew emotional wording gives people excuses to dismiss it. Then he took the next step and filed a formal complaint through the department's process. No side conversations. No handle this quietly request. He wanted it logged the way policy required, because a logged complaint can be audited later. A casual complaint can disappear. The first response he got was exactly what you'd expect from a system that's used to minimizing these moments. Someone tried to frame it as a simple mix-up. Wrong address happens, they said. Late nights are stressful, they implied. Nothing really occurred since nobody got arrested. That argument is how patterns survive. If the only thing that counts is the worst-case outcome, then everything short of tragedy gets treated like background noise. Whitaker didn't argue. He tightened the record. He requested the dispatch information tied to the call. He requested the CAD entry. He requested the event number. He wanted to see what address dispatch actually had, what was typed, what was read over the radio, and what McKenna acknowledged. That's where truth starts separating from excuses. He also made sure the body camera issue was central, not a footnote. Officers don't get to choose when accountability applies. If a call is serious enough to threaten arrest and entry, it's serious enough for a camera, simple as that. A few days later, the conversation shifted inside the building. The word got around that the homeowner wasn't just some guy. People started realizing Whitaker could read a report and immediately spot what was missing. He could compare the narrative to policy in real time. He could ask for things most civilians don't even know exist. That changed how careful everyone suddenly wanted to be. Whitaker didn't lean on his title in public. He didn't need to. The system already knew what it meant. He also did something strategic. He contacted a civil rights attorney before the department could close ranks and declare the matter resolved. The attorney didn't treat it like a dramatic headline. They treated it like a case file. They asked the same questions a good investigator would ask, just with a legal lens. They focused on 4 points. McKenna went to the wrong address and didn't verify it. He claimed loud music with no objective confirmation. He escalated to threats of arrest and entry without a factual basis. He failed to activate his body camera. Those aren't just bad judgment calls, those are policy problems. Legal problems, too, depending on what the evidence shows. The attorney sent preservation requests right away. That meant dispatch audio, CAD logs, GPS data, any neighbor call details, and anything else tied to that incident had to be retained. No accidental deletion later. No convenient gaps. Inside the department, the internal investigation started moving. Interviews got scheduled. Supervisors were asked what they reviewed that night and what they approved. McKenna was asked to explain why he didn't verify the street. He was asked why he escalated. He was asked why his camera wasn't on. That last question hit hard because it wasn't his first time getting asked it. As investigators dug, they didn't just look at this one call. They started looking sideways at his history. Prior complaints, prior write-ups, prior informal concerns that never became anything official. That's where departments either get honest or get exposed. Whitaker's complaint opened a door that had been kept shut for a long time. Records showed multiple complaints about McKenna being confrontational without cause. Stops that escalated fast. Residents describing the same pattern, heavy confidence, light verification. Supervisors knowing he was a problem, but choosing the easy route. Because disciplining an aggressive officer creates paperwork and conflict, and ignoring it feels simpler until it explodes. This time, it didn't stay simple. The attorney made it clear Whitaker had two tracks running at once: internal accountability and civil liability. One didn't replace the other. If the department tried to bury it, the lawsuit would drag it into daylight. McKenna's defense started forming fast. He leaned on the usual claims. He said he acted on a complaint. He said he believed he was at the right address. He said the homeowner's attitude concerned him. He suggested the situation required firmness. It wasn't enough because the record was building around him. Dispatch logs would show the address. GPS would show where he went. Audio would show what he was told. The absence of Bodycam would sit there like a missing page from a book, right at the part that mattered. And Whitaker, of all people, knew how to keep pressure on the process without letting it turn into a personal feud. By the end of the first couple of weeks, the department couldn't treat it as miscommunication anymore. Too many pieces were being requested. Too many people were being interviewed. Too much of McKenna's history started matching the same shape. The county also noticed something else. If this became public, it wouldn't just be about one officer at one door. It would be about why repeated complaints were ignored until the wrong officer picked the wrong address and threatened the wrong homeowner. The internal investigation didn't start with a grand reveal. It started with routine checks that should have happened on night one. Investigators pulled the dispatch package. They listened to the call notes. They checked what address got entered and what address got transmitted. They matched it to the GPS data from McKenna's unit. They compared that to the complaint address. The conclusion was clean. McKenna went to 847 Oak Ridge Lane, while the complaint was for 847 Oak Ridge Drive. The mix-up didn't excuse what happened next because policy still required verification before escalation. Then came the part that made supervisors uncomfortable. McKenna's report didn't match reality. He wrote it like he had probable cause to act. He leaned on the idea that a complaint existed, so enforcement was justified. The problem was that a complaint isn't proof, and his own steps showed he didn't even confirm he was at the right location. Investigators also checked body camera logs. McKenna's camera wasn't activated during the interaction. There was no valid reason documented, no equipment failure reported, no supervisor note, nothing. That's a major policy violation on its own, but it also raised an obvious question. Why was he comfortable threatening arrest and entry while leaving the most important part of the encounter unrecorded? The investigators interviewed Whitaker. They interviewed McKenna. They interviewed the dispatch operator. They interviewed the supervising sergeant assigned that shift. They also spoke to neighbors nearby, not to chase gossip, but to confirm the simplest fact in this entire situation. There was no loud music at Whitaker's house. No one credible could back up McKenna's claim. The street wasn't describing a disturbance. The complaint didn't even belong to that address. The case was turning into a textbook example of what happens when an officer treats authority like a shortcut. At this point, the department had a choice. They could treat the incident like one bad call and hand out a light reprimand, or they could do what they rarely do, open the closet and look for what else was inside. They looked. McKenna had a history, not one dramatic incident that forced a headline. Something more common and honestly more dangerous in the long run. Repeated complaints that sounded similar and went nowhere. Residents had reported him being aggressive without clear cause. People described him escalating conversations quickly and using threats to control situations that didn't require force. Some complaints mentioned stops and contacts where he refused to explain the legal basis for what he was doing. Others mentioned intimidation, then no meaningful follow-up from the department. That pattern mattered because it explained why McKenna felt comfortable acting the way he did at Whitaker's door. He didn't act like someone afraid of consequences. He acted like someone used to them not existing. Supervisors got pulled into it next. Investigators asked what they knew about earlier complaints. They asked why nothing had changed. They asked what corrective actions had been taken. The answers weren't great. A lot of it came down to the usual mix. Complaints labeled unfounded without serious review, informal counseling that never got tracked, and leadership treating community reports like noise instead of warning signals. Nobody wanted the extra work. Nobody wanted the conflict. Everyone wanted the problem to stay quiet. Whitaker's complaint didn't let it stay quiet. Meanwhile, the civil side started tightening too. Whitaker's attorney filed suit against McKenna and the county. It wasn't just about feelings or embarrassment. It centered on unlawful threats, misuse of authority, failure to follow policy, and the county's role in allowing a pattern to continue. The county's legal team tried the standard containment approach. They floated the idea that McKenna made a reasonable mistake. They suggested the interaction was brief. They implied no harm occurred since Whitaker wasn't arrested. Whitaker's response stayed consistent. The harm was the threat itself, delivered without facts, at the wrong address, with no camera, from an officer with a record that leadership kept ignoring. Then the investigation hit the part that usually triggers panic meetings. McKenna's conduct wasn't just unprofessional. Investigators found multiple policy violations. That combination pushed it out of the training issue category. It moved into discipline that couldn't be explained away. The county also had a reputational problem now. Internal affairs was involved. The complainant was the head of it, and the facts were straightforward. If they tried to bury it and it leaked later, it would look like the department only cared because the target had status. They were right to worry because people inside the department started talking, not the helpful kind of talking, the nervous kind. Some officers complained privately that Whitaker was making it a big deal. Others were more honest. They didn't like McKenna. They'd seen him do this kind of thing, and they knew leadership let it slide. The internal investigation wrapped with findings that didn't leave room for creative interpretation. McKenna violated policy repeatedly during a single, simple call. That result triggered the next phase. Administrative discipline was coming. The lawsuit was moving forward. The district attorney's office had enough to evaluate whether criminal charges applied, especially tied to misconduct and unlawful actions under color of authority. McKenna wasn't just facing a write-up anymore. He was facing consequences that could end his career. By the time the internal investigation finished, the county couldn't pretend this was a communication issue. Too many facts lined up the same way. Wrong address. No verification. Threats that didn't match the situation. Body camera not activated. A report that tried to justify the escalation after the fact. That's how it moved from an internal problem to a legal one. The district attorney's office reviewed the investigation file and the supporting records. They didn't need a complicated theory. The conduct was straightforward. McKenna used police authority to threaten enforcement actions without confirming he was even at the correct location. And he did it off camera when policy required recording. That isn't a small mistake. It's misuse of power. Criminal charges followed. McKenna tried to fight it like most officers do when the system finally turns toward them. He framed it as a stressful night. He leaned on the idea that officers need discretion. He pushed the narrative that he was responding to a community complaint and had to act quickly. The prosecution didn't chase emotions. They stayed on sequence and proof. They showed the complaint address and the address McKenna actually went to. They showed that he had multiple chances to verify and chose escalation instead. They highlighted the body camera failure and the lack of any valid explanation for it. They showed the policy requirements he violated and how those rules exist to prevent exactly this kind of conduct. He got convicted. That conviction did what internal discipline alone often fails to do. It removed the argument that this was just department politics. A court treated it as misconduct, not an internal disagreement. After conviction, his peace officer's certification didn't survive. He permanently lost it. No quiet lateral move to another agency. No reset in a neighboring county. The credentials were gone, and so was the career that depended on them. While the criminal case unfolded, Whitaker's civil case kept moving on its own track. The county knew what discovery would reveal if they dragged it out. The ignored complaints, the pattern, and the way leadership let it continue. They also knew what it would look like in public if they fought hard against the head of internal affairs after the facts were confirmed. A long trial wasn't going to help them. They settled. $300,000 to Whitaker. That number wasn't just compensation. It was the county paying for the gap between what policy said and what leadership allowed. McKenna created the incident, but the county created the environment where he believed he could operate like that. The settlement also came with pressure that money alone couldn't solve. The county had to adopt reforms that directly targeted the failures exposed by this call. Inside the department, the cultural effect was immediate. Officers who relied on intimidation started watching their steps. Supervisors realized ignoring complaints could come back on them with receipts. Internal affairs gained leverage to demand real follow-through because Whitaker's case showed what happens when leadership tries to smooth things over instead of fixing it. Whitaker didn't treat the outcome like a victory lap. He treated it like proof of concept. Calm beats chaos. Documentation beats denial. Process beats power trips. He handled the encounter the way people wish they could when they're put on the spot. He stayed steady, he kept it factual, and he made sure the system had something it couldn't dismiss. This story stuck because it wasn't about a dramatic rescue or a lucky break. It was about a common situation turning dangerous for no reason, and a person refusing to let it get normalized. If you're watching this and thinking about what you would have done, that's the point. Would you have argued? Would you have backed down just to end it? Would you have remembered the details the next day? Most people don't get taught how to protect themselves in these moments. Whitaker did 3 things that changed everything. He didn't escalate emotionally, he documented immediately, and he pushed it through the right channels with legal backup when the system started to minimize it. Now I want to hear from you. What would you do if an officer showed up at the wrong address and started threatening arrest anyway? Would you know what to say? Would you know what to document? Drop your thoughts in the comments and share this with someone who needs reminders that accountability is real when you build the record. And if you want more stories like this, realistic, modern, and focused on how people actually win against abusive authority, subscribe.